Sir William made his move. From New York, he sailed with more than 15,000 men south, then up the Chesapeake Bay. He obviously planned to take the largest city in America, Philadelphia. The guns of Fort Mifflin and Fort Mercer blocked an easier entry up the Delaware River into the rebel capital. With his Chesapeake Bay approach, Howe would have to cross overland for 50 miles to reach the city. On the 24th of August, 1777, Washington marched his own army through Philadelphia to intercept the enemy.
4 regiments of light horse, 4 grand divisions of the army and the artillery marched 12 deep and yet took up above 2 hours in passing by. We have now an army well appointed between us and Mr. Howe. John Adams.
A new member of that army was a 19-year-old major general from France who had never seen a musket fired in battle. His name was Marie-Joseph Paul-Yves Roche Gilbert de Motier, Marquis de Lafayette.
Lafayette is simply irresistible. He's such an idealist. Jefferson later said that he had a canine appetite for fame. And somebody else said that he was a man of only one idea. But fortunately for him, it was the idea of the century, namely liberty. Washington loved this guy. He treated him like a son and also like a younger brother throughout the whole war.
Washington was basically aggressive and combative by nature, so he came down to contest Howe's advance against Philadelphia. And he did so at Brandywine on September the 11th. And there his army fought pretty well, but it was outflanked. Washington always seemed to have a problem protecting his flanks.
There was a most infernal fire of cannon and musketry, most incessant shouting. Incline to the right, incline to the left, halt, charge. The balls flying up the ground, the trees cracking over one's head, the leaves falling as in autumn by the grape shot. The action was brilliant. Mr. Washington retreated, that is, ran away, and Mr. Howe remained master of the field. A British officer at Brandywine.
In his first battle, Lafayette was wounded. The next day, he wrote his young wife in France.
Dear heart, Messieurs les Anglais wounded me slightly in the leg, but it is nothing, for the ball did not touch bone or nerve.
Others weren't so lucky. Joseph Townsend, a young Quaker, described the field of combat after the battle.
Awful was the scene to behold. Such a number of fellow human beings lying together, severely wounded and some mortally. A few dead, but a small proportion of them, considering the immense quantity of powder and ball that had been discharged. It was now time for the surgeons to exert themselves.
Falling into the hands of a Revolutionary War surgeon was a mixed blessing at best. With doctors working without antiseptics or anesthetics and guided by fallacious concepts, even minor surgeries became life-threatening. The sickness and disease that ran rampant through the encampments claimed many more lives in the Revolutionary War than did actual combat. Howe followed up his victory at Brandywine with a surprise nighttime attack of Pennsylvania General Anthony Wayne's division at nearby Paoli. Relying solely on the British bayonet, the raid turned into a slaughter. 6 days later, Howe sent Lord Charles Cornwallis into Philadelphia in triumph.
At about 11 o'clock a.m., Lord Cornwallis with his division of the British and auxiliary troops, amounting to about 3,000, marched into this city, to the great relief of the inhabitants who have too long suffered the yoke of arbitrary power, and who testified their approbation of the arrival of the troops by the loudest acclamations of joy. Robert Morton, Philadelphia Loyalist.
Philadelphia had fallen to the British. Soon, Fort Mifflin, which guarded the Delaware River, would fall, opening a British sea route to the principal American city. But the American Congress had slipped out of Philadelphia and was already in session in nearby York.
As the war developed, it was difficult for professional generals to realize that the kind of victory which would have been decisive in European terms, capturing the enemy's major cities, knocking out his major field army, something which would certainly in a European context have brought the enemy to negotiate to a political settlement, and that of course is what they were wanting in America. It turned out that even capturing all the major cities in America did not in fact bring the rebels to terms. And certainly in any conventional terms, Sir William Howe came very near to total victory, but not quite near enough.
Washington was spoiling for another fight. And in the first week of October, he attacked a large British outpost, some 8 to 10 miles from the city at the old settlement called Germantown.
Washington attempted an elaborate strategy that involved several columns converging in the middle of the night. At first, the Americans gained the upper hand and drove the British forward. But then they passed the large stone mansion of the Chew family, Clifton. British soldiers occupied the mansion, and Washington was unsure of how to handle the situation. In an army where a bookseller could quickly become a trusted field commander, General Henry Knox offered his opinion.
It would be unmilitary to leave a castle in our rear, Henry Knox.
The rebels drained their resources trying to capture Clifton. Other rebel troops became so confused by the fog and smoke of the battle that they began firing on each other.
Some of the men unadvisedly called out that their ammunition was spent. The enemy were so near that they overheard them when they first made a stand, and then returned upon our people who, for want of ammunition and reinforcements, were obliged to retreat, which ultimately resulted in the rout of the whole army. Joseph Plum Martin, Continental soldier.
Our loss was about 1,000 men. But of the missing, many, I dare say, took advantage of the time and deserted. In a word, it was a bloody day. George Washington.
After Germantown, Howe settled into Philadelphia for the winter. Benjamin Franklin suggested that Howe didn't occupy Philadelphia, but that Philadelphia occupied Howe.
Howe became obsessed with the social life of the city. He attended balls, the theater. He consorted with the Loyalist population. There were elegant dinners and all kinds of other gala activities.
You can have no idea of the life of continued amusement I live in. I can scarcely have a moment to myself. And most elegantly am I dressed for a ball this evening at Smith's, where we have one every Thursday. No loss for partners. Even I am engaged to 7 different gentlemen. For you must know, 'tis a fixed rule never to dance but 2 dances at a time with the same person. Rebecca Franks, Philadelphia Loyalist.
Howe had decided not to lead the next season's campaign and had requested permission to resign his command from Lord George Germain, the minister responsible for the American War in London. When his resignation was accepted, a witty, artistic young captain named John Andre planned a farewell gala for him called a Mischianza. It would be one of the most lavish celebrations ever held on American soil. Fireworks, decorated barges on the river, and medieval jousts held the guests' attention until midnight. They would dance until dawn. Captain Andre had designed the entire grand affair, even sketching countless details like this hat for a young Loyalist beauty named Peggy Shippen. 2 years later, Andre and Shippen both would be intimately involved with Benedict Arnold in the most notorious treason in American history. While the British entered their festive winter in Philadelphia, Washington's threadbare army prepared for a bitter winter here at Valley Forge.
might have tracked the army from White Marsh to Valley Forge by the blood of their feet, George Washington.
Here all is confusion, smoke and cold, hunger and filthiness. A pox on my bad luck. There comes a bowl of beef soup full of burnt leaves and dirt, sickish enough to make a Hector spew. Away with it, boys. I'll live like a comedian upon air. Albridge and Swallow.
During the Valley Forge winter, 2,500 of Washington's men would die from disease and the cold. But by spring, the nature of America's War of Independence would be radically changed because of events that had recently occurred here in upper New York State, near the town of Saratoga.